Mayor Moran, thank you very much for inviting us to this beautiful scenery here. Istabrak Hall will serve as host for the opening session of the World Finance Conference in just less than 2 weeks' time. We're expecting over 330 delegates from over 50 countries. Would you have any message to share with the delegates, a contemporary Irish welcome, perhaps?
Well, I mean, obviously it's Kid Meal of Alta. I mean, just they can check it all up before they get here. But the first is to be so sorry, I'm going to miss it. And I just couldn't kind of juggle the schedule to be there, but I'm delighted to have a chance to talk to people here. But look, you can see the city behind me. For those of them who haven't come to Limerick before, the most important thing is just go out and enjoy the city.
Fantastic. And if, for those delegates who are coming to Limerick, if there was one takeaway that they could be enriched by, one fable, one fact, one statistic, one event, what immediately comes to mind for you about Limerick?
Yeah, look, I mean, for me, Limerick is always about people and community, right? But I think it's also an incredibly historic city. And I know we're choosing where to do this recording, and it's always like this every day, of course. The sun is always shining like that here in Limerick, and I hope it will be when everybody arrives. But you see behind me the castle that's here and the bridge that's there, and if they get a chance to walk around a bit, on the other side of the bridge is actually a big stone on which the treaty was signed in 1691. And that was the middle of obviously the Jacobite Wars, and the thing about Limerick is it's called the Treaty City. But what an awful lot of people don't know is that as a result of that war, when the treaty was signed, the Irish army were allowed to leave and went to France. And as a result of that, a lot of the very, very fine red Bordeaux wines actually carry Irish names like Palmer and Lynch and others. And that's because it was the Irish generals that went over, bought the vineyards at that time, and actually went into the Irish army. And the leader of the Irish army here, a guy called Patrick Sarsfield, big statue of him over by the cathedral if people want to go looking for it. But he actually died in battle fighting for the French up in Belgium. So there's an incredibly historic city, but tied to Europe for so many years.
Thank you. You've had a storied career in finance, law and risk management. You've operated at C-suite level across 4 different continents. You've excelled in public and private office. I think our delegates would be interested in learning a bit more about your story. Can you give us a bit more insight into who you are and what you've achieved so far?
Yeah, and the piece that's always forgotten about that is that I actually ran a juice bar and went to the Cordon Bleu and learned to cook during a gap year. I didn't start taking until I was in my 30s. Well, look, I left Ireland after studying law. It was the mid-80s. Ireland was a very, very different place then. There was pretty much no employment opportunities for people. Engineers were leaving, and in fact, I always thought that the mate of mine in college who was an engineer would be the first to go, and it ended up being me. And he's never left. He's worked here all his life, which is one of those peculiar twists. But I went off, studied at the University of Pennsylvania, did law and business between the law school and the Wharton School, and that led to doing the New York Bar, worked in Wall Street. And so I know you're having a finance conference, so that was kind of in some ways my introduction to the Wall Street finance at a time when we were inventing swaps and swaptions and various things. A lot of our work was done for, at the time, Credit Suisse, First Boston and Goldman Sachs. So that was my kind of first intro into high finance. And then I came back to Limerick to actually work out the road. Maybe some of the delegates will have flown into Shannon Airport. At the time, it was the home of the largest operating lease company in the world, which was set up by a guy called Tony Ryan, who in fact went on subsequently to set up Ryanair, the airport. So I worked in essentially learning all about asset financing, particularly aircraft and operating leases there. And when I moved on from there, it was to work for an Irish law firm, but back in New York. You can sort of get the trend, I'm backwards and forwards. And even though I was doing law, I was actually doing an awful lot of clients that were coming to set up in Ireland, FDI companies, more banking, more leasing, based back essentially not too far away from my old offices in Sullivan and Cromwell. And I did that until I went working for Zurich Capital Markets, where we set up essentially a capital markets division for them, became a bank in Dublin, and then I was asked by them to go and restructure their Asian operation, which led to restructuring the global operation out of New York. And at that stage I thought, that's it, hang on, I've missed my cap here. I've missed kind of having, all those years off that other people have. So I moved to France, learned French, went to cooking school, as I said, opened a restaurant, bought a medieval house, lots of things that, people do in their midlife crises probably. Learned, I have more architectural terms in French, in medieval architectural terms than most people will ever learn. in their life, and then the crisis hit in Ireland. Probably the juice bar and cordon bleu was the best career move I ever made, because at the time Ireland, as the state, people will probably have read about this, it's sort of recent history, but it is now history. Ireland had got themselves into a lot of trouble like other countries in terms of a property boom financed by credit that essentially brought down the fiscal stability of the country, because it had guaranteed the banks to make sure that they didn't fail. And I was asked by essentially to come back and work in the central bank in Dublin, helping to fix because it wasn't just our domestic banks, some of the international banks in Dublin had also run into serious problems. So I was working to try and fix those, developed a plan for the domestic banks, for the board of the central bank at the time, and when the government changed around the time of the bailout, I moved over to the Treasury, where ultimately I led the Treasury and the bailout programme. I'm not going to keep going, but I guess after that then, as I left the Treasury, having said I would stay there till we got Ireland back into the financial markets, I got much closer to Europe at that stage. In two ways, I spent a lot more time back in France again, and I was also on the board of the European Investment Bank, working for Nomura, that was doing stuff in Europe, an infrastructure company called Meridian, which is based in Paris. But a lot of the times it was kind of companies that were doing disruption. I did work for Uber, work for Revolut. I was on the board of their company here in Ireland for a while. And as that went along, I had moved back to Limerick, and I'd grown up here originally, moved back here, found myself before COVID able to remote work and things like that, and just kind of fell back in love with Limerick. I mean, hopefully the delegates will understand that when they come to see it, but that meant that I campaigned originally here, first time really into the pure political kind of side, that Limerick should be the first, or at least a Irish city, to have its own directly elected mayor. And 3 cities were offered that choice in Ireland in 2019, and Limerick was the only one that chose it. And over the course of the next 5 years, continuing to push the government so the legislation was put through, I ended up being convinced by a lot of my supporters and that I should put my name forward for election. And there were 15 candidates, I got elected, and the rest is history.
Okay, that's an excellent biography. My next question was going to be what prompted you to go from being a Wall Street CEO and a Secretary General to become the mayor, but I think that answers the question.
I guess the one thing I would say is I think maybe as you get older in life, you kind of, more drawn to careers that have a bit more purpose to them. And there's something I always say about being a mayor, and of course I'm the first ever directly elected mayor in Ireland, and hopefully not the last, is that you have a term. In my case it's 5 years. I may get re-elected, but I may not. You're doing that in a place you love and that you're passionate about, so you have this, let's say, pressure to get stuff done, because if you leave after that, the next mayor might not want to do the same things you wanted to do, so you really have that pressure to get them into place. But unlike a lot of national politicians who in a sense have a role and then they leave, if you're a mayor, and lots of colleagues that have become friends now across Europe that are mayors as well, they'll all tell you the same thing. If you make a bad decision as a mayor, you're going to live with it for the rest of your life, because people will tell you every day you pass by a building they don't like or something that you did, that was a really stupid idea that you made. So you really do think in a short-term way about delivery, but in a long-term way about the impact. And I think that's a perfect marriage, of the political kind of dynamics to actually make it work. And if you can do that in a place you love, I mean, there's no better, more meaningful career. And what you find compared to national politics as well is that almost every decision that you make here, you're going to kind of run in or meet somebody that has impacted personally. Whereas at national level, you can change the unemployment level like we did from 15, 18% down to ultimately to 5%. But your chances of being directly impacted or knowing the people directly impacted are a lot less.
Okay.
So mayors are great things to be. Not that I'm encouraging all of the delegates to suddenly run off and do politics, but I would say if any of them are thinking of it, absolutely go for it.
Yeah, I just think that the delegates would be interested in knowing about that career shift, coming from academia, coming from industry, to see what you have done. It's an interesting perspective.
Yeah, just to mention, I suppose, like every day, that I do stuff, you're drawing on I've described a quite complex and different career, but I would say that all day, every day, you're drawing, as you would as you get in through your career in any other area, but you're drawing on different pieces of that, skill set. It may be something to do with the renovation of an old house. It could be something to do with, understanding how to do cash flow models and think about it, or just the fact that I've lived in so many places. Also conditions the way I look at stuff when I see a proposal. I was looking at one there now for a new sports complex that I've wanted to do for a long time, long before I'm here, in an area of great deprivation. And they're showing examples from across the world, but immediately I think you're able to relate to them in a different way. So, as I say to kids when I meet them these days, like, don't assume that there's only one career for anybody anymore.
On the university, which is hosting the World Finance Conference, we're a young university. We only achieved that status in 1989. And the Kemmy Business School, which will host the event, that was only had its purpose-built building in 2008. What level of importance would you place on having a local suburban university when you're trying to serve and develop a city and region of Limerick with growth ambitions?
Yeah, it's absolutely indispensable. I mean, I've done a lot of thinking about Limerick particularly, but in the context of looking across micro and macroeconomics as you think about what makes a place work. That the magic formula these days, it's kind of splitting. It's the mega cities, of which Europe has less and less of those. And then you have what they refer to as the global cities, right? And global cities ultimately stands for globally connected places that have a local feel. Right? And Limerick obviously hasn't changed that much in terms of its population in the 100 years of the state. But it changed incredibly dramatically about 50 years ago, because when the state was set up, the university cities chosen were Galway, Cork and Dublin, and Limerick was left out, as was Waterford, and both of those cities fell back very significantly to the other three. Once the University of Limerick got set up, I think it's 51 years now, or 50 years, I'm not sure exactly, then the path for Limerick totally changed. Instead of people like me going away to university, inevitably a lot of us staying away and not ever coming back, now people locally stay here. And I think you have like maybe 40 or 45% of the graduates from the university get employment locally. And that's a huge source of power, essentially, to a city. It also means that, going back to that idea of the local city, the one that's interesting but local, for a lot of people, being able to go to the university, do a course later, they see their kids locally here, or go teaching there, these are all really important parts of making that place, that definition of a place that you want yourself to live and also to have your family live in. And so, look, I would say if Limerick hadn't UL, we would certainly not be where we are now, and that's brilliant. And look, the business school is great. I mean, at my time, going to university, it was more European studies and that inside. It was more of a technological university. It's now become, if I can call it, full service. I don't know what the expression is, with the medical school, with the business school. But I love, in some ways, because I've lived in France close to Toulouse, I think that there's a really interesting and different dynamic in a business school that isn't in the capital. I think they tend to think differently about the world, as indeed maybe other cities do anyway. And I think that adds a certain richness to the academic experience, either as a student or indeed as a faculty. And you see it with Picardy and others in Toulouse, in the School of Economics in Toulouse. And I know, Stephen Kinsella and others that are in UL, you can see the same dynamic. There's often a different perspective when you listen to a professor from UL, even on the national airways, than you might hear if you're looking at somebody that's in the capital. And I think that's really healthy, and we benefit a huge amount here in Limerick from that.
With that in mind, I hope you don't mind me asking you to put your private office CEO cap on for this one. What are we doing well in the Kemmy Business School, and what have we yet to improve on?
Yeah, look, well, I kind of answered some of that. I think I'm seeing increasingly, really good thinking coming out of there. So I think the evolution of the university over the 50 years has perhaps been the natural trip of just providing third level education for the local population to becoming genuinely a place of research connected across Europe, to actually moving forward the agenda, in terms of how you would actually, as a kind of inevitably as an academic interested in where's the next thing, what's the next area to do it. I think the faculty in the business school are really showing that. I think from probably the biggest thing that could work better is that because I'm in a sort of a bubble, I know an awful lot about the university, I know an awful lot about the business school. I'm not sure enough people know how good you are. And I think that's one of the things that maybe we can help even here. And I suppose having all of these great delegates coming over is part of that story. But one of the reasons why, and I'm really again saying I'm so sorry not to be there when you come to City Hall again. But I think to connect up the university, the business school together with City Hall is a really important sort of, part of the evolution of where we all need to go.
And how do you think events like this, like the World Finance Conference, what does that do for a city's reputation and for the reputation of a university?
Look, it's amazing. I mean, for some time, I think Limerick has, I wouldn't say traded, but maybe I should say traded on a reputation for attracting really interesting events. And then people come, they like it here, and they go back and they kind of do more. We've had the Kidditch World Championships. I know it's a different sphere. This year, I think it's the World Obstacle Course Racing. These are all just sort of examples of, we're not going to host the Olympics here in Limerick. But at the same time, we're increasingly getting known now for a place where you can have fairly serious conferences, but hopefully people have a bit of fun on the side. That goes to the reputation of the university as a place that you can come and people that want to go on these conferences, they want to be tested, right? They're not just coming for play, even though that's part of the experience is getting to know other people. They do want to feel like they've left and been forced to think differently than perhaps before. And we've got that reputation, but we're also picking up a reputation for running really big events. And I think increasingly people realize I've got a little matter of a Ryder Cup to organise next year. 300 or so million people will be watching us in Limerick. The following year we've got Europride, which will mean maybe 300,000 people coming to the city if the stats are coming. They're coming to Limerick and Clare. It's the first time they've ever gone to a smaller city. And I think some of that is actually testimony to the quality of the people that pitched in the first place, but also the growing reputation that Limerick has as a place where we're doing things differently, we're thinking about things differently. It's an exclusive environment, for people that come to the city. And I think a lot of people just want a bit of that now and they want to do it, and they're going home and telling their friends. So I'm just be looking what's your next conference after this one when you get through this successfully.
Just going back your recent history, you've long campaigned, going back to the European Investment Bank, to the Central Bank of Ireland, about the merits of having strong and innovative infrastructure investments. Can you speak a little bit about what you have done to promote Limerick at the European Investment Bank during their funding rounds, and what kind of impacts European funding has had on the university and the wider region?
Yeah, look, I mean, if I go back to the time I was in the department, right? Remember Ireland was essentially bust, right? It hadn't access to the capital markets, so it was required to look at state funding, let's call it that, or interstate funding. So the loans from the ECB were propping up the banks, the loans from the IMF and the European Union were helping to keep the state running. And it was at that time, I think, that the European Investment Bank really came into its own. More than any other time. It was run by a president at the time, Werner Hoyer, who was from Germany. He understood the importance of playing their part to keep Europe together. It was under threat, obviously, but for financial reasons. Was the euro going to survive? Was it not? We now know, with hindsight, not more than 15 years later, how absolutely critical the decisions made then were to actually keep Europe together in the face of what's a totally different threat now with war on the continent. And I think it's the stability and strength of Europe that is so important. But essentially the role that the EIB played at the time locally here was to be a provider of funds, both for there's a development that it's just off camera, but people will see it when they come here. We've a 12-story building just beside me here that's on an area of regeneration in the city centre that was essentially financed to be kicked off by the European Investment Bank. At around the same time as they gave a very large loan to the university, which has been used to create some of the great research areas. I can't remember at the time, it was been planned to use for the library, but I can't remember at the end whether it got used or not there. The tunnel, which is just not that far away from here, upriver, It was actually financed by a big European investment bank loan that is still there. That was the advantage of the EIB, obviously, compared to a lot of private finance, is that you're able to not only get funds at the European rate, but you can also fund for much longer. So it allows the type of infrastructure that's involved in putting a tunnel underneath the river Shannon rather than another bridge in the city centre to be financed over a much longer period. And I think that one runs till 2041 or 2040, and has been there with property at 30-year financing. And that's a really important thing. Now we're back talking to them again. Not unlike an awful lot of other places and cities in Europe, our biggest need now is Ireland is itself become a much wealthier country since, so the funding of infrastructure is a lot easier to do on the state balance sheet. But we need help on housing. The scale of housing required with the fast growing population that Ireland has, and Limerick is growing by 50%, is of a scale that the state can't do it all on its own. So we need help, and I think the really innovative way that the EIB approached the financing of infrastructure, say 10, 15 years ago, and leading up into the Juncker plan, they're now focusing on doing the same in housing, and we're definitely, so keen to be part of that.